Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirk Patty Cake. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer. If you can't tell by the name of this video, idiot is exactly what I'm going for, but I like to have conversations on this channel and hopefully you'll give me a chance to explain myself here. Give me your opinions and maybe we don't agree, but maybe we get a better understanding of where each other is coming from at the end of this. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. Number one way to be featured here is through the monthly prompt writing contest here on the channel called Lamwai, where I give you a monthly prompt. This month's prompt is something special. But then you write a short story or a segment that features that prompt. First Monday video of the month is basking in your guys' creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author with a book out or a book that is coming out, submit your first chapter and your cover down below. They'll be read here on the channel on Mondays that are not the first Monday of the month. And hopefully that'll help more readers find your book. And then also, if there are any subjects that you would like to see me cover or hear my opinions on or response to, I try to facilitate that to the best of my ability. I am not claiming to be correct on anything or the smartest on anything, but I am trying to just sort of give my perspective or opinions on things, and hopefully you feel less alone, or at least like maybe, you know, there are more variations out there to ideas other than what kind of gets put out there at the top most often. Anyway, I like making a fool of myself. Can you tell? If you can't tell, you will in a second here. It'll be very obvious. And the third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, the link is also down in the description below. You can get them at any of your favorite retailers or at the library. I hope you have a good time if you check any of them out. Just prepare yourself. And don't expect representation in them. I just write stories. With that said, let's get into the topic. As you can see, today is a tough love day. I've got my love shirt on, but it gets tougher still. It gets tougher still. This is how serious we are today. We are one-eyed serious. Not serious enough to show off abs, though. That is another thing, but this serious. Okay, so maybe you've been around the block, the bookstore block, the writing community block for a couple of years now, where the topic has been representation, where there's been this heavy push, not just in books, but in movies and in comics. But the term representation has been on the tip of a lot of people's tongues recently, and it comes up a lot. Like, maybe a character shows up in a book and somebody is like, that doesn't represent me, even though we share some sort of superficial or personal aspect that's the same. That's not a good representation of me. And so then it becomes this huge crap storm because it turns into, it needs to be written a certain way in order to represent this one person. Sort of falls in line with the whole idea of sensitivity readers in some cases. I like to think back to the one author who, I can't remember his name. I'd have to Google it, get onto the rabbit trail of it. But he wrote a love story that was done during the Kosovo War between the Serbians and the Albanians. And he got dragged for being not representing the Muslim Albanians the way that certain people wanted him to. Number one, I hate to tell you this, but in war, somebody is always going to look bad. It just depends on which side you're representing as the good guy. But the other side is always the bad side in war because they're conflicting with you. Whether or not they're correct or not, from your perspective, if you're fighting them, they're going to be the bad guy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you as the author condone whichever if you're exploring an idea, but there is always going to be considered the other side when you're dealing with war. Anyway, so he got dragged and this book got canceled for being insensitive and not being written the correct way. And this is one of the problems with representation. So I'm going to go over 7 different things that I have thought about. There are probably more, but there are 7 that I have somewhat organized in approaches or ideas as to why representation as a buzzword and as an idea in any sort of creative writing is a scam. And it's just that not using different perspectives or writing different styles of characters, but the very specific idea of representation, which is representing an individual or a group specifically, through the stand-in as a whole. Now, this can work if you're doing satire and you're making a comment on something, or if you're just trying to tell a bigger story through metaphor, that can also work. But every story that is published is not a statement about some larger issue. And so this idea is scammy. I'm going to go ahead and get my points so I don't start repeating myself for those points. So number one is you are not the characters in the story. So one of the big things that comes up with the representation situation, and I think I mentioned it on a video previously done on this channel like a long time ago, where I talked about a sensitivity reader that dragged this Muslim woman's book because she had another Muslim woman read her book as a sensitivity reader and say that experience does not represent my experience. But that woman was representing her experience through her writing. Or you can go over to The Blood Heir, where the author of that book was exploring and representing the Chinese slave trade through her story. But then she was accused of culturally appropriating Black culture because she was writing about slavery. But she was writing about her ancestors and her history as a Chinese immigrant. So one of the things that always comes up in the case of representation is I don't see myself in this character, or this character is not representing what my experiences were accurately. And the thing is, you are not that character. The character in the book is just the character in the book. They're not necessarily, generally, they're not trying to be some coverall for every experience, because you can't have one individual cover every experience. I've never had my personal experiences for my different demographics be represented accurately to my life in books. And I don't expect other people to represent my experiences through characters. I'm not going to a book to see a reflection of myself. I'm going to a book to read about a character. So, spicy alert, but it's kind of egotistical to open a book and assume or expect for a character to represent you as a person, for you to see yourself in that book instead of finding how you empathize or what you have in common with other characters. Is you want to see them have things in common with you and it be written in there specifically so you can see yourself. It's not a big deal, and it's not a bad thing to say, hey, I have that experience, I know what that's like. But it's another thing to go after the author and say, you better be writing down my experiences so I can see myself in there. Not only that, I've seen the argument that a character has to be written in this certain way in order to permit people to know that they can do something. I might be a bit of a rebel. Hold me back if this is not you. But I have never needed somebody to give me permission to do something in order to go and do it. And it's kind of patronizing to say, hey, you know what? You might be a female, but let me write this story about a female scientist in NASA so that you understand that you can actually go and do that too. Excuse me? So are we supposed to believe now that we are such small-minded individuals, totally, possibly not individuals at all if we go with this representation thing, but we are so small-minded that we have to be given permission by somebody else in order to know that we can go and do something? Like, it's one thing to be woken up to, oh, that's something that I can go and do. I understand that. As somebody who is learning how to draw right now, I can understand. You didn't know that something was a possibility or how to do something until somebody showed you how to do it. But that's a little different than, oh, I didn't know that I could skip school until somebody told me I could do that. Oh, I didn't know that I could just not get married until somebody told me that I could do that. Oh, I didn't know that I could become a chef until somebody told me that I could do that. Not only that, but how patronizing is it as a female if you have to have a male writer or a male person specifically say, hey, by the way, you can do that thing. Let me show you how women can do this thing. So then now, oh, it's unlocked. You can do that thing. You were permissed to do that thing. You've been told by a man that you were able to do that thing. You were told by another female that you were able to do that thing. Does that mean that that person also has the ability or authority to tell you if you can't do thing, then now suddenly you also can't do thing? is something only a possibility if you see it represented in fiction as somebody doing it. So you're like, I can be a fucking girl boss now. Because this is confusing to me. I understand the idea of empowerment, of seeing somebody overcome something through the fiction, through the story of like maybe running into difficulties somewhere and then overcoming those difficulties or overcoming their emotional baggage or overcoming their trauma. But it's another thing entirely to say you need to write this way in order to tell a demographic that they can do something, because otherwise they're never going to know. It's the same thing with, oh, let's make all of these different Barbies, because unless we have Barbie do this specific thing, then young girls aren't going to understand that they can do a thing. It kind of takes away the autonomy and the ability to think from females, don't you think? If you have to tell them so that they can follow what you tell them that they can do. Don't you see something kind of sketchy about that? Anyway, getting back to the point, you are not the character. So you don't have to see the character overcome something or to become something so that you can do it. It's totally different to take inspiration from a character, to be like, I admire that character, versus saying, this character did this thing, so now I feel like I am permitted to do that thing. And there's a difference between looking at a character going through something and saying, I have experienced that, I know what that's like, I empathize, versus saying, I need to see myself in this character. It must reflect me and my experiences. Because I can tell you what, I am never going to see my experiences reflected in a character in anybody's book. Except for mine. In which case, some of my experiences, I'm never going to write about. Because I don't want to share them. Which this leads me into number 2. You are not the author. If you are a reader, if you're a watcher, if you're a consumer of the content, you are not the author. So when you go to the author and demand that they write your life into their story, you're basically just telling them to write for you. And there are people out there who do write specifically for their readers, or who do write specifically for commission. So if you want to see something, then they'll write it for you. But to pick up a book that is totally unrelated to you, where the author is totally unrelated to you, maybe all of your friends are reading it, and you're like looking for yourself in there, and then you go and you start complaining about how you didn't see yourself in there, and the author should be representing your story better. The author is not trying to tell your story unless the author was hired to write your story, or they set out with the desire to tell a story of a certain person, or they said, we want to try to represent this group of people for the story. Then they can do that. But in most cases, an author is just writing their characters, their experiences, their viewpoints, and they're just trying to write maybe what they've seen and share their thoughts, or start maybe a conversation about the world that they see. They're not trying to write yours. So if you find yourself reading a book and going, this is not my experience, and I'm so disappointed and I'm so let down that my ideas and my thoughts and my experiences aren't being shared through other people's fictions, let me give you a suggestion. Try writing it yourself, because nobody has your experiences. Nobody has your voice. Nobody has your characters. Nobody has your thoughts except you. And so if you want to see something specific, write it. That's advice that all of us writers get, is if you want to see something out there, write it. Kind of a sketchy thing to go making demands on people that you don't know to write things for you, specifically for your sensibilities or your experiences or your whatever. Number 3, no individual represents a group of people or all experiences. So this is one of the things I've always found really, really weird about this idea of representation, is no character is actively trying to be, generally, there's always going to be somebody out there that's like, actually, my story is to represent all women. And let me tell you, it probably fails, because if I look at stuff like The Power, if I look at stuff like The Men, which recently came out like last year, I don't have anything in common with those books. If I look at Margaret Atwood's book, I don't have anything in common with those books. So it's impossible to have an individual character in any book represent all experiences of an entire group of people based on demographic, because everyone has such individual experiences that no two are the same, and not everybody shares the exact same experiences either. You're going to have a pitter-patter or a popcorn of different people with different experiences, and some that just never experienced what you are going to experience or have experienced. For me, it's kind of funny when I'm reading fiction, and it seems like the kind of fiction that's written by somebody who's had a fairly comfortable life, because they don't really have a certain sort of emotional depth in their writing. The problems are very superficial, the character emotion is very superficial, and they just seem kind of comfortable. Or they seem informed by, like, I watched poor people on television once, and I feel like I'm educated in the pores. But I am comfortably upper middle class, and I have never really suffered. But I speak for the pores. Like, I've seen those people. I've read their writing. There is some stuff to be desired. It's not for me, that's for sure. But that's not to say that I can't understand the different perspectives, because you know what? Bret Easton Ellis writes from the rich yuppie culture, because, you know, that's the class that he's been in, all from LA the whole time. And I enjoy reading that, but I am getting a completely different perspective than that which I am typically writing, which is an underdog, which is a lower class person, a working class person. I do that a lot. Anyway, this is getting off the point. No individual is representative of everybody's experiences. When I write Alex, when I write Anna, when I write Joey, I'm not writing for all females. I'm not even writing, if we go into Joey because she gets the most screen time out of all of my female characters, I'm not writing Joey to be any sort of representative of all kids, of all young women from trailer park backgrounds who got beat by their father. She just is Joey. And any of the characters that I have are only representing themselves. To try to put a representative of a group title on an individual, whether it's a nonfiction person or a fiction person, is such an incredible weight that is impossible for anyone to carry. Show me a single person in any demographic that can actually represent the experiences of everybody within their certain demographic, and I will be impressed. Because not all Christians have the same experience. Not all Muslims have the same experience. Not all men have the same experiences. Not all women have the same experiences. Not all straight people have the same experiences. Not all gay people have the same experiences. Not all trans people have the same experiences. I don't understand this idea of represent this group. And it's always going to turn into an insult when you say, hey, this character is a representative of all, and then you fit into that group and you're like, but wait a second. That's not my experiences. Am I not counted as a part of that group then? Do I not count? Am I invalidated? Because I am not part of this representative of this group? It's just, don't put the weight of your life on somebody else's character that's not trying to be you. Number 4, it homogenizes storytelling. So when you get down to it and they go, hey, you have to have this in your story and this in your story and this in your story, and then you can't do certain things with those characters because otherwise it looks bad for the representation, you're basically going to end up with the same story again and again and again, because certain characters can't die, certain characters can't act in certain stereotypes, certain characters can't have families that are certain stereotypes. Like, if I had to avoid stereotypes, Joey couldn't exist the way that she does. I don't know if any of my characters could exist the way that they do, because stereotypes are just recognizable patterns. So you can boil pretty much anybody down to a stereotype. I'm a freaking stereotype as a person. Do I look like I have daddy issues? I don't think so. This is perfectly healthy right here. An image of perfect mental health. Question me, try it. Don't believe me? Why? What did I do? But so then you end up with stories that are made up of the same kind of casts, which the same kind of characters, where you can't do anything that falls off the beaten path, because, oh, if you make this character a little bit selfish, they're gonna look bad. Oh, if you make this character not have a dad, that falls into a stereotype, and you can't do that. And so then all the stories become the same. My writing becomes your writing, becomes your writing, becomes your writing. There's no difference. And really, storytelling in art is about getting those different perspectives and seeing and hearing the different ways that people think and interact and observe and what all we've had. And it's not always comfortable. That's another thing. I have an article I want to talk about that I talked about on a podcast last year, but I'll get to it. But when you're reading like nonfiction, especially, you'll find it in fiction too, characters do things and say things that are uncomfortable. Characters and people can also have very messed up perspectives and do very unkosher things, think very unkosher things, not know that what they're doing is wrong, because we're all informed by our own morality and our own desires and what it is that we're chasing after. But somehow when people are reading fiction, it feels like there are times when people expect more from those characters than their moral failings, which are just part of which they're just part of who they are. Like, I'm sure that I don't catch what is morally uncouth with me that I cope with, because we make up ways to make things make sense in our own brains, and I'm sure you do the same thing. I mean, maybe you're perfect and you don't do that, but generally, most of us rationalize our beliefs and our choices, and we don't know when we are doing something immoral. Now, there are many that do know when they're doing something immoral, and you're a problem if you're going out of your way to hurt people. That's also kind of something that's going along with the current internet argument fight, is everybody thinks everybody else is just evil for disagreeing instead of trying to get to the bottom of it. But that's another thing entirely. Forcing representation into everything, and then forcing characters to behave a certain way so that they represent a group a certain way and make it look right so that it's basically running PR for an entire group of people, just homogenizes the story. Getting back to number 4. Number 5, stop going to fiction for validation. What is this need that people have? Tell me, chat. What is this need that people have to go to others to say, hey, am I valid? If I had to have validation from other people to exist, I wouldn't be here. Because if you can't get validation from your dad, what hope do you even have? Personally, I'm like, since I didn't listen to my dad as a child because he told me to do stuff, do you really think that you can just get me to do what you say without my respect? I don't think so. You've got no hope, so you better try to reason with me if you want the respect. But then you know what? If you get the respect, you get a lot of loyalty with that. Anyway, I can't tell you how many times I'm like on social media, right? And I know social media is what it is, but people seeking validation for their behaviors, for their idiosyncrasies, for their opinions or their habits. I saw in this last week, there was somebody going, hey, are people still saying that poets aren't writers? Why do you need other people to validate whether poets are writers or not? You know, if you leave it up to other people to say, hey, yeah, poets are writers, then at any point when the tides turn and you run into a bunch of people that say no they're not, then you're going to be invalidated, right? Or does that percentage not really matter? Just validation hunting. And it goes back to finding the value in yourself and believing in what you're doing versus having to have other people validate your identity or your choices or who you are. Believe in your choices. Walk through the decisions that you make. Understand why you're making the decisions that you make and do them to the best of your abilities with your heart, as knowing why you're exploring an idea or why you're telling a story. Instead of saying, hey guys, is this okay? Are our people supposed to do this? Fiction is fiction. And if you have to lean into a fictional character for your choices to be validated, oh, I don't see my choices being copied by this character to tell me that my choices were the right choices, and we're basically the same person since we're both female, since we're both whatever. It's not about you. You're not the character. A book gives you a chance to live how the character lives, to see how the character sees, to make choices how the character makes choices, or the author makes choices through that character. It's not about validating your identity. It's about living through the characters. And you're going to have a bad time if you always rely on other people to validate your experiences. There are times called reality checking where it is necessary because you're like, I feel insane. I'm not sure what is actually normal or what is actually happening. I feel like I've got to disconnect from reality. So I need somebody to tell me if this is actually happening. That's fine. That is not the same as seeking validation as an individual constantly through assurance from others. And for me, it feels like there's an over-reliance on asking other people to validate who we are or the choices that we make or the opinions that we have, instead of just being like, this is what I think. This is why I think this. And it feels like it's related to an acceptance to being accepted within a group. But since I'm kind of an individual that gets cast out a lot, maybe I'm not the greatest person to talk about what validation is. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Number 6 is understand when you get into a book, you're seeing the world and characters that somebody else created. They aren't you. They won't create like you. They won't think like you. They won't experience like you. It's okay to not like what you go through in a book. And it's okay to express that, hey, I didn't like this. It made me uncomfortable. It made me angry. This made me disgusted. But demanding that people write how you imagine characters or how you imagine people or the experiences that you have is asinine. You're asking, in most cases, for somebody who doesn't know you, who's never known you, to somehow know your intimate life details. To go and, this is also one of the craziest things to me, is when they talk about going and talking to people or hiring people who have actually had true experiences. And don't get me wrong, that's a great thing. Do research. Get as close to things as you possibly can. However, then you run into the issue of, wait a second, whose experience wins out when you've got two different experiences? Because you could say, this was 100% truly my experience, but then you could have this person over here say, that feels over the top, or that is inaccurate to my experience. So what happens when you get the feedback or the reviewers even, where maybe you did the research and you said, this is true life, this is real fact, this is what somebody said who was an ER worker. And then you have this person over here who's just a reader who said, hey, that is so ridiculous, I don't believe it, you need to change that because no way would that ever happen. How do you balance that? It's asinine to assume that anybody will get your version of anything correct when they're building it based on their own perceptions. This also kind of gets lost a lot in the conversations of things, is everybody has their own perspective that is skewed to the way that they see things. I try to make it very clear that when I say my experiences on here, when I share my opinions on here, it is entirely just based on where I am at the time, mentally and experience-wise. And hey, maybe my opinions will change in the future when I get different ideas or experiences, but all I can do is say where I am now and what I think, and then soundboard and see what you guys think too. I cannot give an unskewed perspective, and neither can you, and neither can anybody. But I do the best that I can to share what I see and hopefully create an understanding between the experiences that I've had versus the experiences that you might have had. And we can mix and we can get educated through different lives, the best to our abilities. It's really hard. And then number 7, generally a character is not an insult to a group unless the author is deliberate in creating the character for that purpose. And this requires a knowledge of the intent of the character creation process. So when you get back to assumptions that a character is representative of group, and so you can't make a character do a certain thing because it'll then make the group look bad. Generally, a character acting poorly is not meant to be an insult to the entire group, unless you think that you're doing that yourself, unless you write with that intent, and then you're assuming other people do it. If you write a male white character being stupid and being selfish and being evil, are you doing it with the intent to go and insult the entire group of white males, or are you doing it specifically for this one character? That is the question. Because there's stuff like When No One Is Watching, which I have a review of on this channel, and I would love if you would go check it out because I think that is a very little watched book review, and I had been hoping to get somebody to talk to about it back when I read it, but I don't know anybody that's reading it other than already fans of Alyssa Cole. But that book demonized the white yuppies all moving into this suburb of New York City. They were the bad guys that were abducting the minorities of New York to do experiments on them and were yuppifying the neighborhood. And they fetishized specifically, I think, black people, because there was like a man and a wife couple that moved in, and they would go off to like Hawaii once a year or something, where she would get a bull and he would be cucked by the bull. And so that was a whole thing. And there was the chick that would say howdy doody when the white guy that was the love interest would be acting in a way that showed off his white privilege or something, his dangerous whiteness. So there are certain ways in which it can feel insulting if you do it for a whole group, but then there are also times when people are trying to write certain experiences to express an idea or to explore an idea, which is also why you can't assume the intent of the author is to be insulting or destructive. You got to read each book as an individual idea of what it's presenting and to talk about it in a discussion group. Any character should not be seen as just an insult of the author hates this kind of person. Something else that I thought about from this specifically is I remember seeing someone complaining about recently how many villains there are in Disney that are fat, and how that is fat phobic and how it's meant to insult the fat community specifically. But look at how many Disney villains are not fat. I've seen the same thing with people saying, oh, look at all of the gingers that are evil. But also look at all of the gingers that are not evil. It's so easy to get hyper fixated when you're looking for something, to the point that it becomes, oh, you're not ever allowed to do that, because even if you do it once, if you do it just once, they'll say, oh, you fell into that stereotype. So we got to be careful that we're not becoming so sensitive to stereotypes, so that when we see something, we always assume, oh, it's just, of course it's like this. Because it's become so tropey that it would be that. And so what, the only option is to not do it anymore? I don't think so. I think there needs to be some way to divorce the expectations that have been built over all this time, to just allow a story to be what it's trying to be and to tell what it's trying to tell. And then we can assess the story and talk about the story on its own, separated from the other feedback that's around. And maybe that's kind of a big order. I don't know. Maybe it's unrealistic, but I think it's also unrealistic and unreasonable to assume that any single character is meant to be an insult to an entire group of people just because that character acts out in some way. Stories are just stories, and they can be used to tell experiences or to share morality or to share ideas, but it's getting a little rough with the idea of representation, where writing a character is now suddenly an insult, so you can't write a character in a certain way, and there are all of these rules, and now we're all writing the same to limit discussion and thought and storytelling and ideas. And not to go 1984 on this, but what was it that the party did? The party wanted to limit thought and ideas by shrinking down what you were allowed to talk about, the things you were allowed to say, until you couldn't think outside the box anymore. And that, I think, we are seeing in a lot of different ways. You might notice that there are some drawings here on the screen this time. I might try to integrate some of the drawing practice that I'm doing recently as I try to learn how to draw and practice nonstop. So maybe you can see some of my progress as I go. I don't know. But one thing that I have learned, because I've been drawing fairly obsessively for the last 5-6 months, I know this is all I have to show for it, is that I've been thinking more visually the more that I've drawn. So I can see a lot more and picture a lot more since I've started using that part of my brain more. And this kind of ties back into the AI thing, so I'm going to keep it very, very short. But there's an argument with the AI that it somehow frees you mentally, because it's giving people the ability to create visually when they couldn't create visually before. And I don't think that's true. I think it's a scam to make you think that you have this ability, but you're actually in a tank, approved idea that you can grapple from. And this really stands out to me when I'm looking at some of my character designs and their personalities and their expressions, that it's very specific to them. And I remember using the AI earlier last year, when it was really just starting to pick up. And so I thought it was a cool idea, and then I learned about it and I put it down. But I was trying to do character creation at the time, and I could not get her character design correct. And after it got put down, somebody I know ended up drawing the character and did a more accurate representation of her, because you lose the soul, the uniqueness of those characters by only being able to use what's already been put in that box. If I look at any of my own characters, if I look at Ralph, if I look at Michi, if I look at Katsuo, if I look at Joey, if I look at any of them, yeah, they've got some ideas in them that obviously come from a type, like Joey is an emo girl, Casey and Ralph are both indie rock people, but their appearances are so unique and so inspired by who they are. They don't already exist in a limited box that cannot create what they are. And so it just gives this idea, this facade that it's creating something for you and expanding your creativity, because you're not actually putting anything in order to pull out that character design. Anyway, this just goes back to limiting thought and limiting expression and tricking you into thinking that you are being inclusive and creative with these pretty words and these pretty ideas, but it's actually just limiting. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this channel initially was to create a space for maybe a dissenting opinion, because I went to graduate school for creative writing and I saw a lot of the same ideas and I saw a lot of the same suppression in the querying trenches and in the writing groups that I went to, where it was just a lot of, you're not allowed to write this, you shouldn't write this, you're a bad person if you write this, instead of allowing ideas to be explored or characters to be explored. And so I wanted to create a space with dissenting opinions that dared you to just try whatever you want to try, and then we'll see what comes from that. So here I am with the representation is a scam discussion, daring you to just write the story that you want to write, tell the story that you want to tell. If it is all sketchy ass people that are questionable in nature, go for it. But don't let the fear of other people's judgment suppress the thoughts and the ideas that you want to explore in your writing, because that's what makes art daring. That's what makes art you. That's what makes your thoughts unique and your experiences unique. And some will tell you that your experiences are not valid because yours are not like theirs. Doesn't matter. Your experiences that are you, as much as I said, don't go to others for validation. Your ideas and experiences matter. Now, they might be wrong. There are universal wrongs, like pedophilia is wrong, and if you defend it, if you are a groomer, you are wrong. But I will still have that discussion enough to tell you that there are actual universal bads that are non-negotiable. Before I go off on another tangent, those are my thoughts on representation of being a scam. Just to go in a quick summary. Number 1, you are not the character. Number 2, you are not the author. Number 3, no individual represents a group or people and all of their experiences. Number 4, it homogenizes storytelling. Number 5, don't go to fiction for validation. Number 6, understand that when you pick up a book, you are seeing the world and characters as created by someone else. And number 7, generally characters are not created to insult an entire group. They are just who they are, like I am who I am. Maybe I am an insult to humanity. That's why I have been disowned. But this is where we are. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video sparks some interesting discussions and encourages you to chase down the story that you have to tell if you have a story. Be fearless, be strong, and have a great week. Don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?